Hi, this is Dirk Terpstra with Soul Love. I'll be having a conversation with Dana Liesegang. In 1990, Dana had been violently attacked by a young man who raped her and threw her off a 75-foot cliff and left her for dead on the beach. She was hurt so badly that she was paralyzed from her neck all the way down to her toes. Dana has an amazing story to share with us. And Dana, can you still remember what went through your head when this young man was about to attack you?
Fear. He was choking me, so I was losing consciousness just via being choked, and I had passed out from being choked, so I don't know what it was felt like to, actually be thrown over the cliff. But when I was at the bottom, I actually came to, and for a brief period of time, and I looked up, and I was so cold, and I was just trying to breathe and survive. I fought for my life so hard, and then when I heard the helicopter come, it was almost like I knew it was life flight, but I didn't know. And it was that time that I just let go and slipped into the coma, and apparently my lungs collapsed and I stopped breathing, and so they had to revive me, but I just let go and I heard the helicopter.
When you woke up, what then? What?
I was on a respirator and terrified, and at that point I didn't know how I got there because I had a head injury, and then I was just like, the first words that came to my mind was, I'm paralyzed. And then, I don't want to live like this. I don't want to do this. So, there were times I would bite on the respirator. I would try to spit it out, which is very painful when you try and spit out a respirator. But a lot of anger, fear. I just didn't want to live. I was paralyzed from the neck down. Couldn't even. So, it was about. It must have been about 3, 4 weeks before they decided to start letting me breathe on my own or try it. And there's a respiratory therapist I met down in San Diego a couple weeks ago, and he's like, do you even know how they decide to let you breathe on your own?" I'm like, "No." He goes, "There is zero science to it. They just go, let's see what happens. Let's give it a try." And I kept biting on the respirator so often. I was like, if I have to be like this, I am not going to be on a respirator. I am getting out of here. I will be independent. And so, I made it to the 4-hour stint of breathing on my own. And then finally, when I was stable enough to be on a regular ward, they were like, "You're always going to need a nurse." And I'm like, no, no, that's not going to happen. I'm going to be independent. And at that time, I still couldn't move from here down. So it's just like, that's just not going to work for me. Sorry.
Wow. And how did your employer, like the U.S. Navy, how did they deal with this?
The Navy came in, and pretty much as soon as I was stable, they came into my room. I was barely able to speak. It was a whisper. It was, and it was one syllable at a time. I couldn't say a 2-syllable word without having to take a breath. And the Navy came in and they said, "You have a choice. You can take your right to remain silent. You will be service connected for the rest of your life. You'll be taken care of." They laid out all my benefits, and they said, "Or, since we know this is foul play, you could take this to court, but you will lose. You will get nothing. That's your choice." And so I just and I was in a halo at the time, so there was bolts in my head and the brackets coming down to a vest. And so all I could do is kind of look over at my dad, and he was just like, because there was no way. It was 1990. They're getting away with it still. So I literally, the best took my best option. I took my right to remain silent.
When was the first time that you met with, or at least had contact with Wayne Dyer, and how did he figure out about your story?
Wayne Dyer, he came into my life via Manifest Your Destiny when I was 25. I was at a low point in my life. I was going through a divorce. I was like, if marriage wasn't good, and so I was like, I got something's got to change. And I thought, great, I'm going to be in this wheelchair the rest of my life. And I had hit that wall where I'm like, this is it, really? So then I got suicidal, and he was at a conference in Austin. And everybody's going to Wayne Dyer, and then afterwards I hear all this Wayne Dyer, Wayne Dyer, Wayne Dyer. I'm like, I don't even know who this cat is. And then about a week later, I'm in Borders bookstore, and his book literally fell off the shelf in front of me. So I'm like, whoa, this is Wayne Dyer's. Okay, I'll read this book. So Manifest Your Destiny. And so then I started doing the all meditations, and then things start changing in my life, and I was like, all right, that's it. I'm getting out of this marriage. I'm moving forward. And then fast forward that to me being in well, I wasn't in Australia. I was in Costa Rica, and this was in 2011. I'm in Costa Rica, and I'm having serious PTSD problems, flashbacks, nightmares, because apparently I was studying Spanish at the university there in Costa Rica, and we were 2 streets up from the major drug trafficking and sex trafficking, so we were hearing gunshots and screams at night. And so I was listening to From Ambition to Meaning every single day to get through the next day. And if I wasn't helping this other young gal with her, she was 21 and I was 40, and I was helping her by being there, and so I couldn't leave because I had her as a responsibility. Otherwise, I would have just left Costa Rica. But it was really good because from that moment, I was like, I have to thank this guy. I have to go thank this guy and make sure he knows what he's done for me. And so then I looked him up online while I was in Costa Rica, and he was on the cruise in Australia in 2012. And I'm like, that's it. I don't care. I'm going on this cruise. So I told my friend Trisha, who is my co-founder of Silent No More, I'm like, let's go on this cruise to Australia. Ended up, she sent her cousin, or her niece rather, because she couldn't go. I'm like, all right. And so throughout this week, I finally, first time I saw Wayne, I was like, I couldn't speak. It was just like, okay. And Leah just laughed her butt off at me. She's like, are you kidding me? She's like, you tell me all about this guy and then you can't speak? And so then finally, once I got to a certain point, I was like, I just blurted out, I just want to thank you. And then I was just like, and he's like, slow down, hold on. He's so kind. And so he had Serena come over and listen to the story. And so then that's kind of the first start of the ball rolling. And then by the end of the cruise, Serena wanted to put me in her book, and part of my story in her book, and that I inspired her. And then, so I got invited to a dinner with her and her dad. And then he was like, well, you should go see John of God, because he starts telling me about John of God. I'm like, sure, why not? All right, what the heck? I'll go see John of God. And then the next night at dinner, I was with some other friends that I just met, Robbie Lusher and his wife, Cheryl. Well, they start talking about John of God randomly. And I'm like, I hear you, I'm going.
So tell me more, because I'm really curious, of course, because it's a very extraordinary experience, or at least it must be, to meet with John of God. How did that come about, and how was this meeting?
It was, you really don't get to meet John of God. You just get to see him for like 30 seconds. And he's like, either you go get your herbs, or you go get spiritual surgery, or you go to the crystal bed and get a crystal bath. And it's like, okay, that's kind of weird. So, and he's a medium. So all these doctors use him and all the entities are in the casa, and they're basically assessing you while you're in the line. And every time I'd get close to him, he would just look at me, and he'd be like, come in the afternoon. And because I'm allergic to the herbs, and then I'd go do a crystal bath, and then I'd go in the afternoon, and then I would be like just about up to him, and then like, everybody's spiritual surgery in this life. So it's like, okay. So he never really even touches you. He just kind of looks at you and waves you on and says something in Portuguese. And then the only thing he ever said when I got to go in the final line before I left, he told me I was pretty in Spanish. And I was like, that wasn't Portuguese. But thank you. And I just, because you get to say thank you. And he's like, oh, bonita. And it was beyond. So that was it. That was what he said. But it was such a spiritual experience because you're there, you're meditating every day. You go to the waterfall that's supposed to cleanse you. And that was when I had released a lot. We went down to the waterfall, and people were helping me get down there, and my sister was there, and so we're underneath this waterfall, and it's supposed to wash and purify you, because John, God bless the waterfall or something. But one of the other people there, she's like, oh my God, I just saw this dark shadow come out of you. And it was from that day on that I was just like, huh. The young man no longer has any effect on me. That it was like, I need to forgive him. I need to let go. And so it took me a while when I got home to kind of integrate back into regular society because it's so overwhelming and so peaceful there. And everybody's just, it's just like, it's almost like God's giving you a hug for 2 weeks and just holding you. And then when you get home, you're still feeling this, but you're also feeling the impact of society and the outside world, and you just kind of go, I just kind of hide in my house for a little while and just venture out a little bit at a time, like a little kid going back out into the world.
You didn't feel any anger anymore or nothing?
No, it was just like this huge release. And then I was going off to California, and I was like, and I was going to be in San Diego. And San Diego's where I got hurt. So I'm like, okay, let me Google him and see where he's at. Maybe I can go tell him in person that I forgive him. And so I Google him, and then there's an article where he had kidnapped a woman in Idaho and held her hostage for 5 days, like several years prior. And then below it was his obituary. And I was just like, I was in shock. I was like, you get, at first it was like this overwhelming of, I am totally safe now. Because if he went on to hurt other people, and he could come on back at me, but then I'm safe because he's gone. But then I was sad because he died, and I was like, that's really sad. Because a mother has just lost her son. He died the day before I went to see John of God. Which I was like, wow, that's powerful. And I was like, I just sat there and I stared at the computer screen for such a long time. What do I do with this? What do I do with this? He's dead. I can't say I'm sorry to him. I mean, in spiritual, I can say it and he'll hear me. But, so I'm like, okay, I can contact his parents. So I Google his parents, I find them, and when I finally dialed the phone after just like staring at it, I'm in my house. I hadn't even turned on the lights. The lights, it had gotten dark outside. I'm just staring at my phone. And it was just like, okay. And I finally hit send. And I hear her voice on the other line. It's so sweet, so kind. And I'm just like, I knew your son. And I stutter it out. And she's like, okay. And I said, I want to offer you my condolences. And she was like, well, thank you. And then she asked me how I knew her son. And I wasn't expecting that question. I was like, well, ma'am, I was in the Navy with your son. And she's like, oh, really? And I'm like, yeah. And then it took me a bit, and I got the courage to go, something else I would like to tell you. And I said, I'm the one your son threw off Sunset Cliffs that night. And she's like, what? We didn't even know what happened that night. And I was like, it's because the Navy wouldn't let you know. And then so we chatted, and it finally, all of it came out. And I was, oh, she's like, he raped you? And there was no surprise. It was an immediate, I'm sorry. And what can I do for you? And I was like, but I want you to know that I've forgiven your son. That's what I want you to know. That's why I'm calling you. And then she started crying. And so, of course, I started crying even more. And then she just kept saying, what can I do for you? What can I do for you? And I'm like, I said, I want you to forgive yourself. Because I know that parents blame themselves for when their children do things wrong or they go off course, or like, what did I do? How could I have changed? I said, I want you to forgive yourself. And I also want you to know that I live a happy life. I said, you can Google me if you want. And I'm happy to, give you. So she took the spelling of my name and everything, and I was like, thank you. And she said, thank you. So I'm hoping that, I know there was a lot lifted off on me from that phone call. It was like some closure. So I'm hoping that maybe she got some closure. And she also said, she goes, I want you to know that my son found God. He truly found God before that. And I'm like, that's very good. I'm glad he did. So it was very much a release, I think.
And that part of forgiving, was that purely happening, you think, at the time in the waterfall with John of God, or is the combination because of you've been reading so much about Wayne Dyer's work? How did you learn to forgive?
Oh, the first step was actually just admitting it. And after I went to see John of God, I went on a cruise again to let Wayne know. I'm like, I want to see John of God. So I went on the cruise with him again. And it was when I had told the entire audience, because it was still summertime before, I'd forgiven Brent, but there was also some forgiveness I hadn't had for myself yet. So I was able to, Wayne had me come up and speak to the audience there. And I had no idea of a book deal. This was just him going up, yay, come talk about John of God. So, and I'm like, okay. And so a lot of the forgiveness for Brent came from John of God. And then more of the forgiveness for me started coming when I was able to start admitting it out loud. And as I told the entire audience for the first time, which was probably, 100, 200 people, what had happened to me, what really happened to me, instead of, oh, I was hurt in the military, or I fell off a cliff, or, it was, I flat out told them I was raped and thrown from a 75-foot cliff. And that's, I think, when a lot of it started. Was just admitting it out loud to more than just me and close people, admitting it to people I don't know. I think even more forgiveness happened with that after John of God. That was huge. John of God was maybe, was able to let some of it wash out of me and put me in a more peaceful state of mind. And then when I was able to admit it, I guess it exacerbated that and was the beginning. I guess it's like alcoholism, you have to admit you have the problem. And so I had to admit to more than just me, and I had to admit that this really happened to me. And now I can move on. It's like keeping it inside you, it's poison. And then once you just going to spit it out, you're no longer having the poison. I started getting more sensation. I started getting more function, like I had bowel control. So I guess, part of the colon is letting go. So I was able to, now I've got some bowel function. It's not total control, but I've got some function. Whereas before it was completely paralyzed. I had no bowel function. So, and when all the anger's released, apparently just released in the colon as well, so it actually started functioning in a more proper way. And that's the best I can give you there, and it's monumental. It's not just some little thing. When you do not have bowel control for 21 years of your life, it's weird, but every time I poop, I say thank you. I know. It's like nobody talks about that part of life. Don't talk about that. Gross. I'm like, no, hell no. I'm like, thank you.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And when we met on Maui, I saw you, in the wheelchair, and you're probably sitting now in the wheelchair. Yeah. So, but I also saw you taking your steps. You were walking on Wayne Dyer's hand. And when was it that you first started taking your first steps again?
I took my very first steps when I was 29. I'd done some work in Mexico, and then that was 10 years post-injury. Pretty much unheard of. So, it's been progressing since then. It's been just climbing the ladder, and it is very interesting. As I heal the emotional side, the physical side comes in with it, and then as I heal some physical, then I hit blocks where I have to go and heal some emotional. So the physical and emotional body are very connected.
That's beautiful. Hey, and we've been using the word love, and especially at this point in time for you, what does love mean to you?
Oh, love for me, it means, I guess, being grateful for everything around you. Loving yourself is important. I'm taking this year to love myself, to get to know myself more, and to feel love for every part of me, and know that every part of me is perfect. I like to say dog is God spelled backwards. I think a dog exemplifies love. They are right there by your side, unconditional, happy to see you at all times. I think that's what love is to me. It's unconditional. With humans, there's some conditions. There's always, well, you forgot my birthday. I'm not so happy with you right now. Or like my parents. I've got one of my parents not speaking to me right now because I'm writing some things that she doesn't particularly agree with, and so there's some conditions on their love, but they love you. She might not be speaking to me. She still loves me, but her anger is overwhelming. So with human love, I have hope that I will love a human the way I can love a dog.
Yeah. So, and what would you want to say to all the people, who have been physically or mentally being abused in their lives, who are going through such a hardships and don't see the light anymore? What would you want to say to them?
I would tell them to look in the mirror and see their own beauty, to realize that the anger that they're holding towards the person that hurt them is it's like drinking poison and hoping that someone else dies, and hanging on to that anger and replaying the incident in your mind. It's only perpetuating the problem. God says, forgive and set yourself free. It doesn't say forgive and set your attacker free. That's their job. It's their job to figure out to forgive and set themselves free. I think that's more or less what I would say. Forgiveness sets you free. Doesn't set anybody else but you free. Because it's forgiveness. It is a catch-22. I think sometimes everybody will. Well, I'm not going to forgive them. They're an asshole. Well, it's not about forgiving them. It's about letting go of the anger that's causing dis-ease in your body. It's about rising above and realizing that, it wasn't your fault that this happened. It did happen, and you can acknowledge that, and you don't have to be in the presence of that person if you don't want to be. But when you forgive, you start healing inside. And then you can, and even if you have to start small, like someone cut you off in traffic, send them love. Start there. Start small until you get to yourself and you can get to your attacker or whoever molested you. Because I was molested at the age of 14 by an uncle, and it took me a long time to let that go. But it's about them or why they do it. It's not about you. You're not a bad person because it happened to you.
Very true, very true. So now we're here. So what is next for you? You told me you're writing a book. Tell me a little bit about it.
The book came about, blessing of Serena Dyer. She's like, oh, it's your time, because Wayne had me speak again in Denver. He had me come up and tell the audience about forgiving, and I had no idea what I was supposed to say when I got up to him. He's like, okay, now turn around, tell the audience what you just did. I'm like, what did I just do? Because I didn't know he knew the story. So anyway, after that, Serena was like, this is your time. You got to write a book. I'm like, well, okay, let's do it. And Hay House ends up, because of Serena calling me and giving me a book deal. And so it's called, the working title is Falling Up, because I may have been thrown off a cliff, but I've been falling up ever since. So it's about forgiveness, victory, triumph, perseverance, and never giving up on your dream. You can do anything you set your mind to.
When do you plan to finish it?
It's due to come out in the fall.
And are you still active, like with, you were just speaking about Silent No More? What is the purpose of that?
The purpose of Silent No More is more awareness. In future we hope to maybe get a phone number on bus stops right outside military bases, because you walk off base, you hop on a city bus, but a lot of times, when you are assaulted in the military, you can't really tell anyone. And if you do, then you get more problems, and they blame you, or, I know people they've had false information put in their military file about them. And it's like, what? No, that's not okay. So my hope is awareness to help change how men perceive women in the military, and B, it's just to show that rape's just not okay. It's not okay. Military, it's not okay for the military to cover it up. It's not going to put a bad name on the military that some of their members are raping their own. What's putting the bad name on them is that they're covering it up. And my big hope for Silent No More is to bring about change in the military and to help other women and men forgive not only their attacker but the military. It wasn't until I listening to Immaculate speak that I was like, oh, that's the final piece. I hadn't forgiven the military, and it still brought up the anger every time I hear someone else getting raped and the military getting away with it, or it's like, and now I you know, I'm still working on that, but it's not as much because I started changing the way I thought about it and realizing that the military is protecting their entity, right? They're for throughout time, it's rape and pillage in the military to conquer. How are you to train young men to rape and pillage and have women in their presence and have these women be different than these women? It's really tough, I think, as a collective consciousness. So I think that the military needs to train differently and make sure that women are seen as something to respect. And it's not okay to rape and pillage in anywhere. It's not okay for men to go rape other women in another country just because it's another country. I had a buddy of mine that shed light on me he was a Marine, and we were talking. He's like, rape doesn't happen that much in the military. And I'm like, dude, really? You're my friend. You know what happened to me. He's like, well, yeah, in the Marines, they rape the whores, but they don't rape our own. And I was like, that sentence was like, so it's okay in your mind to rape someone who is actually selling you what you're trying to get, but for some reason it wasn't okay in his mind. I was like, none of that made any sense to me at the time, but it wasn't until I heard Immaculately that I put the pieces together, and I was like, so here's where the problem lies. As a whole, they think it's okay to rape, but there are those that are going to be able to tell the difference between their own comrade and the enemy, or not. So you got those in the military who have come from the ghetto. They don't know a whole lot of right from wrong. Maybe they've come from abusive families. A lot of us join the military to get away from home, or because we weren't good in school, or whatever. We're getting out of somewhere. And the military is your light to go, I can be someone. I can go do something with my life. But you still got that mindset where you came from. And so for a long time, one of the things I kept in my mind with my attacker, I'm not saying his name because I would like to keep safe. I'd like to keep his family, their hearts safe. So anyway, so for a long time I would try to think, well, maybe his background. I don't know what happened to him as a child, because he was only 18 and I was 19. So yeah, what happens to someone between those first 18 years to make them be so angry towards women? And it may not have been any of that. It may have just been the collective consciousness in his brain of the military. And so we need to change that in the military to help bring about, yes, we've been working side by side for quite some time in the military, but all this other stuff is being covered up. They know they can get away with it. There are those who join the military specifically because they know they can get away with rape. And that's not okay. So the military needs to be held accountable at this point. And they need to hold themselves accountable. And I think that's some of the goals with Silent Memorial, helping bring about change.
Beautiful. Yeah, beautiful causes. And I'm so happy that you are, speaking out, not just for yourself, but, for everybody, who needs that. And so I'm very, very thankful for the interview and for the way you speak with me, and I'm also so glad to share your story, for you and for all the others. That is so amazing. So thank you very much for that.